We are Gold Ivy, a health company dedicated to simplifying health and wellness. Tune in as we search to find the deep, real, and raw truth. We're here to talk big, no room for small talk. It is our mission to inspire, seek growth, simplify the action steps, and build confidence.
You decide what works for your daily life and how to transform our lessons into your gold. Are you ready to step into your power? Now is the time. Join us on the fearless pursuit of self-discovery and growth.
This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production. Something that has made a world of difference for us and many people we know over this past year has been getting our groceries delivered right to our door. The ability to get local, fresh groceries without us having to step foot into a grocery store has been something we are so grateful for. Convenience, price, and quality are extremely important to us, and that's why we love and support Instacart. Instacart can deliver to your front door in as little as 1 hour. You can shop multiple stores, see deals in your area to help you save money, and every item is hand-selected by shoppers based on your preferences. To start your 14-day free trial and to get free delivery on your first order over $35, follow the link in the show notes to let Instacart know that we sent you and to help support the show. Instacart, never step foot in a grocery store ever again. We are so happy you're here today because today's episode is pure magic with Dr. Rachel Allyn. Dr. Rachel Allyn is a holistic psychologist, writer, retreat leader, and pleasure expert who has been featured in multiple talk shows and magazines, including Psychology Today, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health Magazine, and many others. Aside from all of her credentials and professional work, we were captivated by her warmth. Dr. Rachel Allyn was so easy to talk to about topics that are typically taboo or uncomfortable to bring up with strangers. We could feel how passionate she is about her work and loved her vulnerability, talking about her own human experience with pleasure and bodyfulness. Her book, The Pleasure Is All Yours, is a game changer. After reading it, we feel more deeply connected to ourselves and see pleasure in a whole new way. The Pleasure Is All Yours encourages readers to reconnect and reclaim your inner sense of pleasure and joy through the embodiment practices of bodyfulness. Thank you for tuning in today. We are so excited for you to learn from Dr. Rachel Allyn. And if you find this episode valuable, we would love for you to share with a friend that may love it too. And please don't forget to give us a rating and leave us a review. It really helps support our show. Now to today's episode of Ivy Unleashed.
Welcome back, everyone. You are listening to Ivy Unleashed. Andrea and I are so excited for today's guest. She is going to not only blow your mind, but your body.
Yep. Yes. Welcome to Ivy Unleashed, Dr. Rachel Allyn.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. We have been blown away by your book. The Pleasure Is All Yours is a book that Brooke and I know, and we've talked about how we feel like we need to read it 17 more times to even grasp it. And I don't know how you fit all of this inside this book. It's got so much science and life lessons and the message to really just enjoy your life and heal your trauma and improve your relationships. I could go on and on and on. And so thank you for writing this book. It is a gift to us, and we cannot wait to hear what our listeners think about it.
Well, I love hearing that because it definitely wasn't easy to do. I found that what comes much more naturally to me are conversations like this than sitting alone, toiling away, writing and editing. But somewhere in me, I have this part of me that's a writer. And but there's an element to writing a book that is also vulnerable. And so you never really know how people are going to respond. And at the end of the day, it's so important that it gets into the right hands of the people that it can impact. So that makes me happy to hear.
Yeah. And, it is vulnerable because it's a topic that we haven't talked about yet. It might make people a little squirmish. I know when we first got it in our hands, we were like, this is going to be all about sex. And are we sure we really want to go here with our audience? And you being the pleasure expert, but you really don't hit on that until page 200 about. And so I would love to just dive right into why pleasure is so much more than just erotica and what pleasure truly is.
What pleasure truly is our birthright. It's a life force energy. It's a way to heal. It is the building blocks to joy and happiness. It starts from within. It starts within our body and in our brain. And it's those sensual moments. It is connection with others. It can be in all aspects of our life if we choose to really see it that way, because pleasure is all around us. Of course, there's painful ones as well. Let's just say that our bodies and as human beings, we really wouldn't have the capacity to experience something so powerful if it wasn't really important and healing in our lives. So a lot of my work is trying to reframe something that has long been seen as taboo or naughty or only reduced to sex.
Yes. And I love how you start out the book that way by talking about, especially America. You for some reason, you think that we're all loose and sexual and, we have media showing us all of these sexual things. But in reality, there's a ton of guilt and shame associated with our sensual nature, our sexual nature. And I love that you kind of go through the history of America and how we've been repressed. And just speaking from my own experience, I have a mom who's very open with her sensuality. And I think just from religion maybe and just going to church that I feel that like guilt and shame associated with pleasure and things like that. And so I'd love for you to kind of touch on why you think there's so much guilt and shame associated with sensuality, especially in America.
Well, our roots are puritanical. There were certain religious groups that left Europe and England because they wanted even more rules and kind of a strict agenda. And so the foundation it's not only puritanical, but it's also based in power dynamics such as slavery. And that fits into sort of my discussion in the book as well, just a bit as I talk about the history. But there is a lot of fear on kind of the power of the erotic. And at the time, the focus was really on having the most pious life you could in order to really get to where the pleasure is going to be, which is in heaven. But you suffer now so that you can then get to heaven later. So it in a way, yes, to pleasure, but only in the afterlife, which, who really knows what that entails, and doesn't sound like much fun living. And then there are other ways in which the roots of America are also based in really dehumanizing people. And if we think about the ways, what kind of mentality you would need to have in order to be a slave owner and harm other people is to disconnect from some of your own feelings, your own spectrum of feelings, including empathy, and also to deprive others of their right to feel good and pleasure and joy. So I think we've had a lot of confusion around based on that. And then as we go into the Industrial Revolution, there's this real wave of work, and I think, therefore I am, and we're robots, and push yourself more. Everything's about productivity. So it's moved us, and we're really in that mindset within hustle culture right now to this day. So there has been, I think, with capitalism, this idea that it just keep doing more, push yourself, override your body, override what feels good or balanced to your body, because what's really premium is to be productive and make money and that whole thing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting with hustle culture. Like we have the most depressed, anxious, suicidal, like you name it. There's more mental health challenges and epidemics than ever. People are taking less vacation than ever, more depressed than ever. And so it's like, is this really working? Is it really working to push yourself that much and deprive yourself that much of pleasure?
Right. Well, and I would say no. I guess a lot of us would also say that. It's when we think of the reliance on pharmaceuticals, all these ways in which and I'm not shaming anybody who's taking medication, but I think just when we look at the larger trends of how if we don't know how to self-regulate, if we don't know how to really live from our truth, then no wonder we're unhappy. No wonder we might want these different things that are going to numb us. And when we're living within some sick systems that aren't really encouraging our humanness and our body's boundaries and limits, and our need for rest just as much as productivity. Because rest, really, if we don't have any sort of restoration in our lives, it's going to be pretty hard to feel good, to feel pleasure, joy, happiness. Mm-hmm. And yet that's where a lot of people are at, and their relationships are suffering as well. And our relationships are really, it's like our oxygen. It's what we need also so desperately as humans. But if we're working all the time, who really has the energy for deeper relationships?
Yeah. And you mentioned your truth, listening to your truth. And that's something that Andrea and I always talk about is, how do you even know what your truth is if you're not tuned into your body, your mind? The reason that it's important to us, and specifically to me, is because of my own healing journey and being so disembodied. And that's something that you talk about throughout the book, is being out of your body and not connected to your body. And so through my healing journey, it's been all about calming my nervous system, practicing mindfulness, which you talk about in the book, how it's a buzzword right now, mindfulness. But what you talk about is bodyfulness. And so I would love to dive into what is bodyfulness, and let's talk about it.
Let's talk bodyfulness. Yeah. I think it's a fun word, right? Isn't it kind of a fun word to say too?
Yes.
And yes, the buzzword of mindfulness is inherent. It's part of bodyfulness. Really, bodyfulness says that you have embodied mindfulness. So you have a regular practice of actually listening to your body, the language of your body, including your emotional body, how your emotions are in your body, but also things like energy levels, digestion, intuition, even just body temperature. So this is something that children are actually much better at. Animals are much better at. So once you have a regular practice of actually listening and paying attention, the next part really departs from mindfulness, because then it's the now what? Now that we have that awareness, what do we do with that in order to really heal, let go of past trauma, or to regulate and balance ourselves? And that's where we bring in, there's a lot of movement and expression and release. So that's where there's movement, whether it be traditional things that look more traditionally like exercise, but also things like tears, sweating, sighing, massage, foam rolling, yoga. So it's different for everybody, what's going to be depending on what they just embodied and noticed. But it really is encouraging expression rather than repression. So rather than this idea that being buttoned up and holding it all in means you're healthy, and that releasing means you're crazy, it's actually that no, to release is really what allows us to then recenter, recalibrate, because we absorb so much. We need to have outlets. Otherwise, we're like that tea kettle that just is going to burst open with steam. And we see that happen all the time. We see, mass shootings or other sorts of ways people just flip a switch. And there's a lot that has to do with why that happens for people. I'm not going to simplify it as, they're not bodyful, but I think you get the point. But then the real thing that then distinguishes bodyfulness from other types of somatic psychology. So somatic psychology is more body-based methods when they bring in the body as well as the mind. The thing that bodyfulness really has that is different is that it also brings in this pleasure reclamation, given our history, given the messages that say, especially for women, that you should feel guilty if you are giving to yourself or feeling good in your body, or maybe you can feel okay, but not too good. So it's really about, like I said at the beginning, it's this, how do we reclaim these ways in which we can really enjoy being in our body, really respect it, love it. Maybe not all the time. It's, we're sick or we have an injury, but that overall, we can really like it in a way that we let ourselves receive, and it fills us up such that we have then just more capacity for others as well, rather than deprivation and guilt, or the way people flip a switch if they've been so deprived for so long and then they binge and then they feel guilty. So that third part of bodyfulness is like, how can we just embrace that we all deserve to feel good in our body? And of course, in ways that don't harm others and in ways that have balance.
Yeah, I love, you have a TED Talk that's incredible. And I love in it how the way that you kind of break this down, and I think especially for women, I think it's so important, like the receiving is so challenging for us sometimes. And you break it down into dessert, like you're out at a restaurant and the waiter says, would anybody like dessert? What is your response? Is it like, oh, I shouldn't? Or, oh, maybe I'll have a taste, or absolutely not. I think if you think about that question, you can kind of know where you fall in line. Like, of course I deserve dessert. Who wouldn't want dessert? Of course, let's get some, And I think you can kind of think about what would my response be to that, and kind of apply it to different types of pleasure. So I think that's such a great way that you explained it for people to think about, how open are you to pleasing yourself or receiving?
Yep. And then I even now developed, I have it on my website, a pleasure quiz, and I'm still always updating it and refining it a bit, but who doesn't like one of those little quizzes, right? Mm-hmm. And again, this one is a way to dive deeper into that question that I started in the TEDx talk. And there are people who are indulgers, there are people who are savorers, and there are people who are abstainers. And like anything in psychology and mind-body connection, we're variable. But there can be some consistent themes. I sometimes might be a little bit more of a savorer and sometimes an indulger, but in general, what is my mindset and what do I allow myself? So those are some of the questions that I think it answers for people with that quiz also.
Yeah. And there's so many great quizzes at the end of the book that I'm obsessed with. So thank you for putting those in there. I know it's something that so many people will love, and I'm so excited for our listeners to get the chance to dive in deep and go through these practices. But you also in the book talk a lot about the science behind trauma. And that's something that really, it intrigues me, is that in my healing journey and in talking about how trauma gets stuck in our tissues, you have a whole section about how issues are in our tissues. And you talk about the amygdala, the hippocampus, different parts of the brain, and how unconsciously we don't remember things, subconsciously, and just all these different parts of the brain. That is fascinating to me. And I would love for you to kind of break it down into how does this happen? How do issues really, and trauma specifically, how does that get stored in our deep tissues without us even knowing it?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. That's why I had to geek out a little bit in that section of the book, because there's 3 sections. In the first section, we talked about how that's more of the history. How did we get here? And then that middle section is the pathway through of how can we understand the ways in which bodyfulness and receiving all sorts of healthy pleasures in life, how that can really, am I just making this up? Is this just some random idea? And really, I like to point out, I'm just integrating a lot of the wisdom from people and scientists, neuroscience, et cetera. So I'm integrating. I'm not saying I'm inventing a new method so much as bringing in the social and historical and political context with what we know about science. And we're learning so much in science right now about trauma in the body. I think it's a really exciting renaissance that's happening within psychology and psychotherapy, is this recognition that the quote unquote talking cure is not always enough for some conditions and situations. And now I'm not anti-talking. There's so much that we can get from clarity and conversation and mental insights. But what I've found is that people can have all sorts of insights, and then they are confused and really down on themselves about why they repeat patterns, why they might go home to their family at Christmas and have this reactivity that is as if they were an 8-year-old. And it's probably because to their body, it is reacting like that 8-year-old because the trauma got stuck. And what really happens is that it's not that some of the stressful traumas in our life that are completely really the problem. It's what we do with that trauma. Do we have the opportunity after there's something traumatic to really complete our stress cycle? So basically complete that fight, flight, freeze, fawn is now another one that we're including, in order to complete that cycle and then feel safety again. Now, what happens for a lot of people, maybe they're a child and they don't have agency. So they just have to hold on to it. And so it's understood as like this frozen residue that really gets caught in our connective tissue and in our nervous system reactive patterns. So then as an adult, what we need to do is to come into the body to sort of that raw data, the raw truth of the body from that past experience. And we need to feel safe in that moment. And then that's where some of it can release from the connective tissue and in day-to-day life, sort of reset those reactive patterns. But we need to feel like we have agency in the way that we didn't when that original trauma happened.
Yeah. So are you saying, so you go home for Christmas and you're in that same environment where maybe the trauma happened, or you're around the same people in which the trauma happened. And so your body recognizes that and then it resurfaces because you haven't healed it. You haven't done the bodyfulness yet.
Right. And it can be either being back with family or even just something familiar to that initial trauma or trauma. And there can be all different types of trauma. Some can be isolated events. Some can be more developmental due to caregivers. Some can be, more chronic, or like a domestic abuse situation. Or so there's obviously that makes a difference. And there are definitely books out there that really are exclusively about trauma, and I have a resource guide for that. But it was important to mention just because it's a big barrier to pleasure and safety and ease. But yes, to answer your question, I mean, it's really interesting how our body and mind, it's always wanting to protect us. But sometimes we are stuck in the past when we go back into something that is really similar or familiar to the earlier trauma, because then it just freezes up, or it does that fight flight. It's trying to save you or protect you in the way that it couldn't before. So it's this sweet thing, and yet sometimes it's misfiring, or if we feel like it's ruling us. And so when we're not in those stressful situations, we're able to practice really listening to our body, knowing what to do and regulate our body, and to feel safety and agency and resource from our body. Then we go into the situation that might be similar, and there might be a little bit of reactivity, but we notice it sooner. We know how to self-soothe sooner. We practice our agency by maybe leaving or speaking up for ourselves, or reorienting to the here and now, and not time traveling in the way that we might have otherwise.
Yeah, you have a quote in the book on this topic that I found fascinating, that it was recently estimated that 60% of physical medical problems are emotionally induced. And hearing that, it's like, ooh, yes, stress. And for the longest time, whenever I would go in to see doctors, they'd say, I think you're just stressed. And I would say, well, right, because you're making me stressed, because you can't tell me what's going on. And as I do this deep work of, healing from parasites and all these things, but I've done so much emotional work of working with a therapist and getting into yoga and kind of all these things that you recommend in the book. And so it was like, okay, now I know what's going on. Now, how do I get these emotions to go through me, right? I've gone through talk therapy. And so for someone who has done talk therapy, maybe hasn't, but is like, yep, okay, I got some trauma in me. What are some of these practices that you recommend people can start with just to start practicing bodyfulness?
Well, I'm trained in trauma sensitive or trauma informed yoga is what it's called. So that I think is starting to increase, that there are more yoga teachers that specifically have classes that cater to trauma. So that means that they really pay attention to the pace and the style, and giving people agency to pick and choose their pace, or fast or slow, or how they move. And so that I think that's what I know the best is trauma sensitive yoga teachers and classes. But there's I think if you are feeling safe in your environment, that is really first and foremost. So whether you feel safe with your coach or your therapist or somebody who can give you that co-regulation, as we call it, can help soothe you, that really can help make a difference, because otherwise you're going to be in that stress mode. But then I think it really can start simple. For some people who are really not connected to their body, it starts as simple as noticing their breath, noticing their feet on the ground, bringing their hands to their center, maybe starting to get familiar with just bringing their own healing touch, noticing each of their senses and ways that they can maybe lean into more pleasurable senses, or remove themselves from things that don't feel that pleasurable from their senses. And so it's a lot of just really subtle movements, and maybe even connecting to the gut and digestion. And because if there's been trauma, for a lot of people, they don't want to be in their body. To be in their body feels really uncomfortable and feels really foreign. So depending on the nature of the past trauma and violation or abuse or that sort of thing, you have to start really small, so you aren't triggering people, because it's a vulnerable place. I mean, just think of how vulnerable. I mean, it's powerful yet vulnerable, which goes back to why that was so feared with our ancestors, is that the body and pleasure can be vulnerable as well as really powerful and amazing. So that's what I would say is find either a trauma therapist or a trauma sensitive yoga teacher or any sort of guide who is familiar with how to deal with trauma that can help you just slowly start to be in your body, inhabit your body. And then from there, befriend it and really recognize the ways that it's rooting for our survival all the time. If we just listen to it and knew how to release from it.
Yeah, it's powerful. I'm thinking too about the people who don't resonate and don't have trauma, right? Like about those people, why is this important for them? What will Bodyfulness provide someone who feels like they are connected with their body?
One of the things I've been saying since I released the book is that part of why I wrote it is because everybody has a body and everybody at least came from a sexual being. And most everybody is a sexual being, but there's also people who are asexual. And yet everybody has a story of shame or confusion or disconnection or guilt around their body and the aspect of being a sexual being. So while maybe some people don't have trauma like a capital T, I've yet to find, I guess, at least anybody who hasn't already done some of the work that doesn't have trauma, or at least some intergenerational trauma that is passed on, which is another thing that's really neat that we're learning in psychology, is the ways that it can really leave an imprint on our DNA based on our ancestors. For the individuals that maybe don't need it, I would like to meet you because I'd like to know who you are, where you are, how you did it. And I'm not saying we're all sick or that we're all messed up. I think it's all a spectrum, to what extent people are connected to their bodies and owning their pleasures. But also there can be too much of a thing, of a good thing, where there can be people who might say, well, I have a great relationship with my body and pleasure, only to find that they're always sensation and pleasure seeking. And it's a way to escape. And that's a big part of why Bodyfulness, that second step, is how do we ride the wave of discomfort? And once we feel empowered and have agency to deal with the discomfort in life, the pain in life, then we let pleasure come to us or receive the pleasures around us versus grasping and chasing it in ways that then cause us more harm.
Yeah. And I like how you talk about having that balance of like not depriving, not overindulging, finding that like riding the wave, like you said. And I think it's important to kind of go through the different pleasures, thinking about the different categories. There's the senses, there's being playful. Like you've said in your book, we have play dates for our kids. Like, why don't we do that as adults? There's your livelihood, and then there's sexual. So there's different categories. And I think that's important because, like Brooke said earlier, we thought we were just going to be learning about sex. Just being comfortable with sex is really what I thought this book was going to be about, which would have also been great. But
we can do this next time. We can have the whole next be focused on the third section, which is all about that.
Yeah, but I'd love for you to just touch on how it's not just sex, that it's your senses, it's finding adrenaline, it's eating the dessert, it's playing with your kids, getting silly, how it's not just sex in your day-to-day, and why those are important pleasures to also just, that have nothing to do with sex, that are part of your routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have nothing to do with sex, and yet they also do have something to do with sex, as far as they are the ultimate foreplay for our own selves and our own bodies, so that when we are in an erotic space, we aren't going to be blocked or stuck in our head or in this place of disconnection. So yeah, it's both and, I guess. But the reason I wanted to really focus on all these other ways that pleasures in our lives is it really started with, I had these pleasure parties, which were ultimately more about women coming together to talk about relationships and sex. I know there's other pleasure parties that might sell sex toys or do other things, but mine were really, let's have some champagne and chat and gab about relationships and our bodies and sex in a fun way. And what I noticed is that the main thing all the women really wanted was, how can I have the best sex ever? I want to have mind-blowing orgasms and that sort of thing, only to find that a lot of people they didn't even really like their body or know their body, feel good in their body. And so much in American capitalism is about like 3 quick steps to this and that. And it was so important to me as a psychologist to say, you know what, it isn't as easy as 3 quick steps. Let's start at the very basics, like how to like your body, how to know your body, how to receive and let go in other ways, in other areas of your life. If you can really enjoy that first bite of food, if you can really savor the ways the wind is blowing in your hair, if you can let yourself be silly and playful, and not take yourself so seriously and be so self-conscious, all these different ways that then you bring that. It's a magnetism that I think that draws others to you. And it's also, there's like a confidence, erotic and sexual confidence that you have in the bedroom, because you know yourself better. You maybe aren't as self-conscious. You also probably know your body boundaries better, are more connected to your voice and expression. There's an inner knowing, I think, that's developed by allowing yourself to receive in some of these other ways and to express yourself in some of these other ways outside of the bedroom. But sensual, playful, there's liveliness, which is also sort of flow states, and then the erotic and sexual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's almost like an innocent way of thinking about it. I think sometimes people squirm to think about, having confidence in the bedroom. But like you said, if you're allowing yourself to let go, be playful, like not take yourself so seriously, it creates that pathway. And I'm glad you said that too, because, you mentioned in the book that you grew up in a home that was, very sex positive, and a lot of people didn't. And so I think that's like a good way to kind of build that skill, to practice being silly and not worrying what your hair looks like, or, maybe walking around your room naked, just to like get used to being freer and like being comfortable with your body. I think there's like little things that you can do that can kind of help. Is there anything that you've noticed in your practice that just kind of help people get more comfortable with their sexuality?
If I had to really pick the main thing, I would say to embrace dancing and more flowing music. And because from the beginning of time, humans have been people who danced and sang. And so I think that dancing is a really powerful, so connecting to music and that rhythm can really help people get out of a certain part of their heads and more into their bodies. And we see that also from little kids. Little kids just, they let themselves follow the rhythm. So maybe if I had to pick the one sort of bodyful movement, I would say dance. And there's tons of different types. So maybe tango is your thing. Maybe hip hop is your thing. Maybe burlesque is somebody else's. So that would be, I guess, if I had to pick one, my answer.
We had Cynthia Shockley on about sensuality, and she said that's what got her out of her awkwardness in the bedroom was she took a pole dancing class and then became an instructor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep thinking how this all really comes back to our self-worth and how we are deserving and worthy by simply being. And then as we age, we learn that that's not the case. And then we get to this age where now we're unlearning these things. And that's something that you talk a lot about in your book. In what ways does our self-worth determine our ability to be intimate with others, and how that coincides with intimacy?
Gosh, yeah, I think that is such a core aspect of really how we show up in all areas of our life, but especially in the more vulnerable ones. Because when we have strong or solid self-worth, then I think that we see our light and we recognize our shadow, but we don't feel any less worthy because of our shadow or those things that we're still working on. So there's a way in which we're able to take responsibility and be honest with ourselves. Certainly, this is maybe something I regret, or I would do this differently, or wow, I really learned the hard way. But it says I'm still worthy. I'm still worthy to receive and of love and of feeling good and of meaning and purpose and companionship. So that's, I think, the big difference is that there is that sense that just because maybe some unfortunate things happen in my life or I've made some mistakes, it doesn't mean that I'm any less worthy. And I think from there, people that have strong self-worth are really good at their boundaries. They're able to verbalize their boundaries, so they're not going to be those people pleasers as much. And there's going to be an inner knowing that probably leads them to make choices that are really right for them, as opposed to doing things for other people, or to, again, that people pleasing, or to maybe this is what I should do versus what I want to do. And of course, we sometimes have obligations and shoulds. I'm not saying we abandon them all, but I think we all know those times in which we we're like, how did I get here? This is not what I wanted. I wanted to go down this other path, whether it be with a relationship or a job or something. And probably it was because we were really listening to all the noise outside of us versus our own inner knowing. And that is part of our self-worth. Mm-hmm. And I talk in the book about the question, what do I want, can be a really challenging one, especially for a lot of women, because they've been so focused on giving to others, caring for others, self-sacrificing, so that they don't even know what they want. And it feels a little startling or a little scary, or who am I to even indulge? Maybe that's too much. I want too much, that kind of thing. And so when I think for all genders, if we're able to just see that as human beings, we're all worthy of having balance between the work, but the play and what feels good. And we deserve to seek what we do want and what we desire. And desire is a beautiful inspiration for more creativity in our lives as well.
And your people that love you want you to decide what you want and go for it. I think there's that tough feeling of being selfish when you are thinking about what you want, you go for it, because everybody is watching you and they're like, how selfish, because they also want to be doing that, but they're not, So when Brooke and I coach, one of our main questions we ask, our clients are, what do you enjoy? What makes you happy? What makes you laugh? What brings you joy? And majority of our clients that are women, they have no idea. They have no clue. Well, I used to run, or I used to, and so I think it's so important, the work that you're doing, especially with women, to get you to reconnect. Like, what makes you you? Like, don't you want your kids to know what it is that you love and watch you do it so that they do the same thing for themselves? I think it's something that, maybe we were taught this, but I definitely don't think we were designed to not connect to what makes us us and what lights us up.
And how much better are you when you feel good?
Mm-hmm. Right. Because that's ultimately then you just have more energy and capacity for other people. And that's why I think we should all figure out our non-negotiables. What are those 2 or 3 things that are just so helpful to regulating us, to just keeping us centered and solid ground and connected to ourselves? And when we don't prioritize those, how just everything else can feel kind of like a mess, or we aren't making, or showing up in ways that are really aligned with what we need. So yeah, go be selfish in the most unselfish way possible by giving yourself those things that you enjoy.
I love that idea of just like, what is my bare minimum that makes me me, that I can, like, no matter where I am or who I'm around, I can incorporate that so that I show up as the most vibrant person I can, with my bare minimum necessities. I love that.
Yeah. I'm curious what your non-negotiables are.
Yeah.
Well, mine is definitely one of the first ones is movement, is for sure having a movement practice pretty much every day of some kind. And, some days it's definitely like a workout class. Some days it's more of a walk or stretching or something. But it just cleanses me. I'm just clearer. It just sets the tone, and it's just my whole life. I've been an athlete or a tomboy or, outdoorsy. So it's just so bound up in who I am. And then there's 2 others that I struggle with, but I know that they need to be there, but sleep and hydration. And so here I have my water, but I don't really love drinking water. So, and then to sleep, I mean, I just want to be a night owl and frolic into the evening, into the wee hours. And, but then I pay the price. And so I'm trying to get better with that.
I have a question about your movement, because as I was reading your book, something really resonated with me, and it was a light bulb moment for me, because after having kids, I've just become a little bit more anxious than I ever was. I never considered myself an anxious person. But then when I read your book, and you were talking about yourself as an athlete, and you were saying, I might have had undiagnosed anxiety that I was fixing with being extremely active. And I'm like, oh, was I doing that too? Like, was I just running really far anytime I felt anxious, and then it kind of went away? So I'm curious, your take on that, whether you feel like you had something undiagnosed and you self-medicated with movement, or like kind of where you're at with that.
Right. Yeah. For me, it was ADHD that I think I was medicating without knowing I had it. And now I look back, I'm like, well, my dad, I have other people in my family, I see it. But growing up as a kid, you don't know any different. And And I was definitely a goody two shoes. I mean, I got, all A's, and I really excelled in a lot of different activities, probably too much. I probably actually needed to be more of a kid and have more pleasures. But I think the only way I was able to do that with some mild to moderate ADHD at the time is that I was engaged in really dynamic sports. I mean, cross-country skiing. I mean, you are breathing hard for a long period of time, using all your muscle groups. So these real endurance sports, triathlons. I mean, you are as focused and present as you're ever going to be in your mind after exerting yourself in that way. So my body led me to it. I let it lead me to it. And so it helped and it served me in that way. Now, as an adult, it's a little harder just because I'm sitting for many hours at a time with clients, although I do a lot of walking and talking and yoga and movement with my clients as well. So that's what I think. What I was just, without knowing it, was medicating the healthy way growing up.
And how is it now? Like, are you just active enough now that it's at bay, or have you had to do any additional therapy for it?
Well, I haven't had any therapy specifically for ADHD, but I definitely have to really pay attention to things like artificial sweeteners and colors, and that sort of thing is exacerbated all the more with people who have attentional issues. But I definitely plan my day such that I have enough space in between clients so that I can stretch and release. I really carve out time for vigorous movement almost every day, or some way to discharge out the stress. And then look at how I've been trying to weave in walking with clients and yoga with clients. So, and I'm a better therapist for it. I have more energy for it when I do that, but it's definitely harder. I mean, think about growing up. I mean, it's expected that you have this chunk of time after school, maybe where you're in some sport or activity. Whereas now as adults, it's like, figure it out on your own, find the time. I just try to have accountability with friends, but I also I love it. I naturally want to move and exercise and engage in sports because I love it. And, that's what leads us to continue and stick with something if we actually, really resonates.
For sure.
Think about the people listening who don't like exercise, because you talk so much about movement in your book, and it's something that I found so healing is running and yoga and having a variety of different movement, and just how much it's improved my anxiety and my digestion. And I feel like when I'm moving, if I don't get movement in the day, I feel just stuck, and it takes even more force to get me going. But once I'm going, I'm in my groove. It feels great. But for people who are just it's just not my jam, what do you recommend? Have you had clients who are no exercise, or what comes to mind?
Yes, I recognize it's a big bias of mine. And I've definitely had a lot of people who aren't connected to their bodies. They don't see sports as anything enjoyable. Even going back to childhood, maybe they hated gym class, and it's this chore. It's this absolute chore that they don't like. And I say, just like we need a variety of food groups, we need to have a variety of movement in our life. So I tell people to experiment, try to just investigate all sorts of different things, because there might then be something that you're going to land on. It might be, water aerobics, and you would never try water aerobics your whole life. It's something about being in the water and the buoyancy, and it leaves you refreshed. So trying to just encourage people to try all different ways, because I think people go straight to exercise is what they have to do, when really I want to help people to just be embodied. So that could be a walk in the woods. That could be just some gentle stretching at your house, or Tai Chi or something. For me, I need something vigorous. For some people, doing Qigong or Tai Chi, or ways of being in their body that are much more kind of contemplative or energetic, that might be the main thing that they need. I would say that for the most part, we all need a variety, though. We need to mix it up. But yet, as much as somebody can make it fun and playful and just sprinkle it in throughout the week, it doesn't have to be a long duration to actually for our mind, body health. It's more about 20 minutes, or 15, 20 minutes at least, for at least the goal of feeling better emotionally. So yeah, there's going to be those things. Just like I don't like drinking water, but I'm trying to make myself drink more water. I guess that's what they have to do with exercise.
Yeah, it's how do you feel after? You get those 15 minutes in, and then how do you feel when you're at the computer all day hunched over and you're exhausted? Is that how you want to feel? And comparing yourself and between the two, and I love how you said experimenting, being curious with ourselves, and how does it make us feel, and well, do we want more of that?
I love it. I'm the same way with water. I'm trying to force myself into drinking it. It's weird. You'd think like as a runner, you'd be super dehydrated and want to drink all the time, but yeah, it makes a difference. What do you notice with water for how you feel?
Well, I think that it's somebody pointed out to me a while back that my fatigue was probably due to being dehydrated. And so then that's when I notice I'm fatigued. It's one of the things I go straight to, even though sometimes I'm tired from something completely different, or I have jet lag or who knows what, but things flow, things flow more when we're hydrated, when we're kind of keeping that elixir through us. Like I say in the book, motion is lotion. Well, yeah, any sort of fluidity and hydration is a big part of that too.
And it makes you go to the bathroom, so you have to get up out of your chair and get moving.
Or even like bringing it back into the bedroom. I always tell people too, like have water by your bed, not just because being hydrated is important, but we're going to go into something I don't know if you'll need to edit it out, but you say you're going to have a little fun, give somebody a blowjob. You don't want to be dehydrated. You don't want to have like a cotton mouth. You always want to have lube of different kinds by the bed. So water and maybe other types of lube, some coconut oil, that kind of thing. So I just went there.
I was about to go there. So Thanks for kicking it up. End of the book, you have a chapter all on erotic pleasure. And I would love for you to share just some tips for our audience, maybe go-to tips that you give your clients, your favorite tips. Share some erotic pleasure tips.
Yeah, pleasure tips to have better erotica and erotic moments with your lover. Yeah, I think that one of the things that we know is that in the beginning, there's the dopamine and the excitement, and then that can shift a bit as we have been with somebody longer. And so a big tip that I think all couples therapists would agree on is to keep looking for ways to invite novelty into the relationship. I don't care if it's that neither of you have gone skydiving before and you go skydiving. Now that's a pretty extreme example, but really anything, it could even be just going to a new part of town or eating kind of a different type of cuisine than you normally would, but keep really applying some new experiences together, things that maybe neither of you have done or certainly done together. So that is important.
Is that for the dopamine, like to get more like to restart your relationship and get that dopamine hit that you had when you first started dating?
Yeah, it does. And it's shared dopamine. You're sharing the experience. So it's so different than if one person goes and does this something that really is more novel and exciting and comes home and talks about it, right? That's so different than both people viscerally, embodying it together. Or it doesn't even always have to be so dopamine induced. I mean, even just couples that do a dance or yoga class together. I mean, they're in their bodies together in these other ways as well. They're moving, they're flowing, they're in these visceral moments and in their senses together. So those would be a couple of tips. Also, I would say another thing that a lot of couples and relationship therapists agree on is that there can be so much emphasis on orgasm and climax to a detrimental effect, such that it leaves people really in their head, performance anxiety, or, am I doing it right or wrong? Or am I going to disappoint them if I don't get there? And so a lot of times, not only does it make people stuck in their heads, but it really leads the two people to not maybe enjoy the journey or the process or some of that playfulness or the sensualness of a massage or being silly or just kind of slowing down and exploring some other ways to kind of be with one another, because we just go kind of straight to like all right, just take off your clothes and let's kind of do our usual position. And I recognize people are busy. People have also, a lot of people are tired, but it doesn't always need to be about penetrative sex that leads to climax and orgasm. There's so many other ways to have that intimacy and bond and feel erotic that can even be part of snuggling or these other ways in which touch is involved. And then you still have that oxytocin, that bonding hormone. So even though I'm a sex therapist, I don't want to shame or guilt people into, just have more sex. It's really about what is intimacy to you and how can you just maintain the bond in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
That connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've been working with a coach, and I actually got to bring my husband in on one of our sessions, which was amazing. But we talked about intimacy in it. And I realized a huge part that was missing with us was communication, like fully communicating what you want and why you're struggling to like get in the mood, you know? And so that way, if you're like more open and honest about, am I really tired? Is it just the time of day? Do I need something from you? And I think sometimes just, it's hard to talk through what you're actually feeling. And I feel like if we did that more, it would kind of like loosen everybody up about like, when do you want to do it? Like what time of day is even good? Especially when you have kids, it's so hard to like figure out when that's going to happen. And so I think for us, like communication is definitely helping to talk about like what we want, when we want it, how we want it. Those types of things is definitely helping for us at least.
Why do you think communication is so hard?
Oh, well, nobody really grows up with classes on emotions and then from there, how do you share your emotions? In fact, we're, especially for boys, taught to don't have strong feelings, unless it's anger, and certainly don't share them. Whereas for people socialized female, there's more of an acceptance that you do connect to feelings and share them. But I think that one of the biggest breakdowns, and this is looking at a more heteronormative model. So I'm talking about people, a male and female, but males are raised to be disconnected from emotions and females are raised to be disconnected from their bodies. And so then when there's that partnership, there's just different ways of missing each other, of just not really, one person wants to talk and to have an emotional conversation might really be what is a turn on for them. Whereas the other person is terrified. They don't even know how to access their emotions. And so of course they shut the other person down. That leads them to feel, rejected. And there's this cycle. Whereas then maybe he really wants to be playful with her body and give her a massage, but she's shut off from her body, or she feels it's associated with feelings of being a slut. So I don't want you to massage me. And then he feels rejected and is turned off and moves away. So it's kind of messed up that this is how we've devised how males and females are supposed to be, because it's such the antithesis of a lot of connection. But it doesn't mean that we can't change that as adults, and we can't, rewire that and work on that to get to a place where there's more honest, vulnerable, direct, real communication. And there's also the recognition in the field that there's some things we shouldn't share. There's such a thing as oversharing. Sometimes can be too much with our relationships, but I know we're not really kind of talking about that, but I just had to make a note.
Well, I feel like that gap is where you come in. Mm-hmm. That you are, I feel like, put on this planet to fill that gap, of not only connecting us to our body, but to each other. And just such a great point. Like, how are we supposed to have this conversation with each other when we're both cut off from those things? And so I just want to reemphasize that this book is for women and men to read, and that there's so much science behind why we have these disconnects, and that we do have the power to change it. And something you said earlier that was really powerful was, kind of ownership of, if you're thinking and you're tuning into your body, you can kind of own why it's feeling the way it's feeling. You can get curious about it, and then you can do something about it and not blame, your husband for, wanting a massage that leads to something else. Mm-hmm. You can think about like, why am I uncomfortable with that? What is coming up for me? And how can I get curious about that and kind of think about what emotions are coming up and why, and then maybe do talk therapy, maybe get into yoga, hire you. I don't know what you need to do, but kind of owning that these things may feel uncomfortable, but they don't have to be.
Yeah. And you're reclaiming that agency that you keep talking about. And when you are whole on your own and your significant other is whole on their own, then you become one together. But you talk so beautifully in your book about how you can't change people. You can't fix people. The only thing you can do is take ownership of you. It starts from within, and it starts by reconnecting to your body, who you are, what you want. And it's true, we're not taught these things in school, and that's why it's so important now. And I also want to emphasize that it's never too late to tune into who you are, what you want. It's never too late.
Yeah, and something juicy that I want to just touch a little bit is you had an eat, pray, love type of experience in your life. And we're kind of wondering if you would talk to us about what happened and what you learned from it.
Right. Yeah. Because Bali was really central to the story, it seemed all the more so like the eat, pray, love experience. And it basically divorce and Bali were involved. But because I went to Bali, it was technically it was for my honeymoon, even though it was about a year or so after actually getting married. And of course, you expect your honeymoon is going to be this really romantic getaway. And it was quite honestly the trip in which I just had this moment where I was really brought to my knees, realizing that my partner, my husband, it wasn't romantic at all and really didn't have any romantic feelings for me. And I didn't dive into it really specifically just out of respect to him, but it was a real moment for me that was devastating, understandably. I'd been waiting and waiting all these years for his medical residency to end so that we could reconnect. And here was his chance, and he didn't really want to. And we ended up getting divorced, and I went back to Bali several years later for a yoga retreat. It was my favorite musician, one of my favorite musicians, Michael Franti, and one of my favorite yoga teachers, Sean Korn. And it was really kind of this last minute decision. I just felt it seemed right. And I'd already just led a few of my own retreats, so I really needed to receive myself. And at that time I was unpartnered, and I went there, and I did feel like I just was so liberated and free to enjoy the country in the way that I couldn't before. And it was also an opportunity for me to really look at the ways my life completely flourished since I got divorced, because as sort of the doctor's wife, I was really so focused on him and the relationship. And getting divorced, I really turned to a spiritual path. So my spiritual life really grew, my business, and really, my private practice and business really flourished, and made a lot of new, amazing friends. And so it was just these neat bookends of seeing how sometimes letting go of something, as painful as it is, it's really though making room for something else and something truer to me. So then I had a fun, wild time in Bali for those few weeks, and I'll have to make it back there. I recommend everybody going there.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. And so do your retreats. Will you talk to us a little bit about what these retreats entail and how people can get involved?
Yeah, retreats are, I feel like, a fast track to really resetting, because they're usually a Saturday to a Saturday, although I have done and will continue to do some long weekends in the future. But in that week, you really just strip away some of the stress, because somebody's making all these really amazing meals for you, really nutritious, but taste so good. You have all of the sunshine, which I know in the Midwest and these Northern hemispheres, we don't get as much of during the winter. There's movement, there's adventure, there's meeting new people. It's like adult summer camp. And I loved going to summer camp growing up. So maybe there's no surprise that I like to lead these now. And then I also give people a lot of unstructured time to fill it as they want. If maybe they want to go surfing, maybe they want to take a nap. But we do have a yoga class every morning and a meditation class before dinner. And it's been really a great experience. And it's not something maybe everybody has the time or the money or inclination for. But for those who decide to do it, it seems like it's been really transformative and meaningful.
So one of the most highlighted pages that Brooke and I highlighted almost every page in your book. It is so beautifully written. I can't say it enough that everybody needs to read this to better their life.
And also in different seasons, right? Like Andrea and I are 10 years apart. She has kids. I don't. She's married. I'm not. And it's something that in every different season of life, like you're going to want to pick it up and reread it, because there's science, there's tips, there's so much that I don't think you can grasp it in one reading. Like you have to go back to it.
I read it 3 weeks ago and I want to read it again already. I was like jealous. I was jealous that she had it all week. I was like, I read it back. But so there's this passage in it on page 88 that I wanted to read. And it's, the fact is we want to reconnect. We want more fulfilling relationships, and we want to feel pleasure in our bodies, free of shame and embarrassment, in real time, in real life, but we don't quite know how. And Brooke and I related to that so much, and this book tells you how. It tells you how to reconnect to yourself. It tells you how to reconnect in your relationships. And so we are so thankful that you wrote this, that we got to meet you, and we just hope that others get it, read it, share it, and we want them to know how to find you and how to find your book. So can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, well, I would say, I guess the one-stop shop of my website is probably a good place to start, which is drrachelallyn.com, Allyn with a Y. And then my Instagram is the same, just all one word, Dr. Rachel Allyn. And those are probably the main. I mean, I have like a LinkedIn as well, that kind of thing. But you can find info about the retreats, other sorts of media things. Oh, actually, I guess I'm also now, as of today, literally as of today, I am now a contributor to the Psychology Today blog. So they asked me to do a regular blog for them. So there'll be a little more writing.
Congratulations.
That's incredible.
That website's awesome. I use it all the time and refer our clients to to find therapists. Awesome.
Yeah, they're great. They've been around a while. So yeah, I think that's probably the main way. And I mean, I'd love to do more of a book tour. We'll see how things shake out pandemic wise. So, but it's been great to join some people's book clubs or women's circles, or that's always a ton of fun for me. If you guys know anybody or anybody listening has a book club or a women's circle or something, I always love joining and talking to people.
I will start a book club just to have you in.
I was going to say, this is the perfect book for a book club because, I mean, you're going to need 5 hours, so get some good bottles of wine. But there's so much to dive into. It's something that we need to be talking more about. And so thank you again for this. It's been such a gift. You are such a gift. Can't tell you how much it means to us for you to be here with us. And we will plug everything in our show notes on our socials because we want everyone to have access to you and your amazing work.
I'm getting nervous that we're ending the show because I don't want you to go anywhere. And I feel so honored that you're with us. And I'm like, let's keep it forever. But anyway, we always wrap up our show with 3 gold stars for our listeners. Would you like to share your 3 gold stars?
Well, some of them I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I have throughout the book a bunch of little rhymes because sometimes that's what helps people to remember things. But the first is to name it is to tame it. So and we were referencing that idea of owning it. So just really that awareness of like, I'm naming how I feel or naming my experience. And that sometimes we think we need something fancier than that, but actually just acknowledgement. Not only is it huge just for our own self-awareness, but it actually, the energy of the feeling feels soothed. Like, you heard me. I don't have to speak up, that emotion and that feeling. So there's a sense of sometimes that's as simple as that. Maybe you don't have time to be more bodyful than that, but just see if you can kind of name where you're at and how you're feeling and your emotions. And then the other ones that I mentioned that I love, I mean, I love to say expression, not repression. So, and there's also a lot of suppression, which is repression tends to be a little bit more subconscious, whereas suppression is like, maybe we know we're like burying something. So expression, as far as rather than just hold everything inside, maybe just sometimes let out a sigh or shake out your hands. Or I always joke, like those weightlifters you see at the gym that are like, as they lift their weights. Like sometimes that is actually a really healthy discharge to express out and release some stress. And then the other one I also said, which is movement is medicine. Just try to find whatever sort of movement is your medicine and not at the expense of rest. I'm not saying, if you're exhausted, maybe sometimes that's what you need as your medicine, but those are my 3 main gold stars.
Those are awesome.
Your 3 gold stars remind me of one of the quotes in your book that's actually unknown, but it's, if you listen to your body whisper, you never have to hear it scream.
So good.
So good. I love it.
Yes.
All right. I wish I said it.
Us too, because that's how I feel. Like going through what I went through, now I'm like, yes. I'm like, okay, what do you need? It's that compassion. That's what has been so huge for me, is befriending your body, that compassion piece that I think everyone needs to.
No more powering learn through.
Yes.
Listen to the whisper.
Yes. All right. Our next segment is Unleashing Ivy. So these are our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Oh, okay. Sweet. I'm ready.
Okay. So first question is, how would you respond to someone who thinks if they overindulge in pleasure that they'll lose self-control, they'll gain weight, etc.?
Oh, right. Well, that makes me think that they probably have either had times where they did, or they were raised and told that they would. So if it's the latter, I would say give it a try and see what happens. Like, can you actually make space for and allow yourself to receive what feels good, and that it's not going to be the end of the world if you did overindulge a little. You just wake up the next day and you sort of get back to probably your overly rigid life. But that idea of people catastrophize or think the worst, sometimes it's like the fear of the fear is even, and the anticipation is the worst part. But maybe just give a try to indulging just a bit and see if you can kind of enjoy it and recognize the world won't fall apart. You might actually just the opposite.
Yeah. I think of food, like people thinking if they allow themselves to have some ice cream, they'll eat a whole gallon of it, you know? It's like, you probably won't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we're meant to have a little indulgence now and then. I mean, at this point, like I recognize that around this time of year, I probably put on November, December, put on like 5 pounds. And then by spring, early summer, it goes off. And I don't stress. I don't sit there and feel like, oh, I've overindulged or what's wrong with me. I just recognize it. We're human animals. We have all these cycles. We have fluctuations. We indulge a little bit some days. And then we have those days where maybe for whatever reason, we really didn't get enough sustenance. So trying to trust the process of what our body's telling us. Now, sometimes cravings are very much about emotional needs that aren't being met. And, that's maybe a longer answer that I would obviously help somebody with. But
yeah, I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the wave that you ride, I think you talking about that with the moderation and indulging here or there, people have this fear that they won't be able to stop. But in reality, it's like, just like you said, why don't you just try indulging here or there so that you can be happier in general? Then there won't be anything that's so extreme. You won't want to go way off here or way off there. You're just going to feel better because you trust yourself. You're listening to yourself. If you trust yourself more, you'll be happier. And then a little bit of ice cream here or there is not a big deal. There's nothing to be afraid of. You don't have to be afraid of yourself. Mm-hmm. You can trust yourself. And I think it's building that and riding the wave, like you said, allowing yourself the seasons of life and enjoying life along the way with pleasuring yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, the scientific name for that ability also to really regulate with a lot of different things like, alcohol, foods, called interoception. So that's that real deep awareness of like, what do I need right now? Or what's my set point? Or it is an inner knowing. And they've done research looking at how powerful yoga is to help people cultivate interoception. And that for a lot of people with eating disorders or substance abuse, that there is something off with their interoception. So sort of the normal cues that say, okay, enough, stop, aren't there. So, but it can be rebuilt, but I think can help take away maybe some of the shame people feel that, okay, you aren't a bad person. It's just that we have to sort of fine tune this connection between all these different systems in your body and your brain and what's driving you towards it.
I love that you just said that.
And that's a concept that I never heard of. And so when I was reading in the book, I was like, this makes so much sense. So if what Dr. Rachel just said resonates with you at all, just another reason on top of the 5 million to pick up this book.
I feel like I really got to know you in the book with your life experience that you gave talking about. And something that I could really feel is that you have this courage to express yourself. And I know that you came from, like we said, a sex positive home, but you're walking around the planet now telling people to enjoy sex and enjoy the pleasures of life and tune into your senses. And so I'm curious what you feel kind of gives you that freedom and courage to express yourself and to try all of these things that, most of us are kind of skeptical of or wouldn't go out and try.
Well, I think back to what we were saying. Thank you, by the way, for saying that. And just this whole show. Thank you. I'm like, ooh, my ego was feeling real good. But back to what we were saying, as far as the ADHD, I think part of ADHD can be sometimes there's an impulsivity. And fortunately, I have more of a lower grade, kind of mild version of it. But, I've lately been joking with friends about how we hear a lot of messages about being vulnerable and putting yourself out there and taking risks. And then I actually do that naturally. So for me, the practice is sometimes saying no, or sometimes maybe really thinking through, I maybe have better judgment before you say or do some of these things. So my natural disposition or temperament, I guess, is to seek new things or to really express myself and put myself out there. And sometimes actually I probably shouldn't. So I think it comes naturally. And I've definitely had times where I've face planted or people didn't receive me and who I am. In fact, the more that I have as a woman really been owning my body, my sexuality, my right to feel good and travel the world and be independent, the more I've found that I actually really threaten some other women and have, there's been some backlash. And so that's been an interesting thing for me to just sit with and understand of how I come across. And it's like that idea is, you might be too much for some people, and I'm not going to change who I am, but it just makes me a little bit more aware of the ways I do put myself out there, that it can be confrontational and too much for some people. So everybody has their own pace. So I've had to really separate that from, allow myself to be who I am, but also recognize sometimes maybe temper it a bit, or check in with sort of the state of things, the room, read the room a little bit better. Even though I believe we should always be as authentic as possible, sometimes we just need to dial down our authenticity just a tad.
That's got to be a tough balance, because I mean, you have been a very busy woman. Like, you have been on multiple talk shows and in all kinds of magazines. And I feel like that has to be so hard, because, my gut says, well, those people aren't your people. Like, I love everything about you. This book is incredible. It's changing my life. And I feel like if you're feeling something so passionately, say it. And if people doesn't resonate with them, like, don't read it then, but I understand what you're saying too, that, there needs to be a professionalism or whatever. But I bet that's so tricky to, like you said, be authentically you, but then kind of like tiptoe around certain people. I feel like I can relate to that a lot too.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if it's tiptoeing so much. It's just, I think that we all, have to just recognize we wear different hats in different places. I do tend to act pretty much the same in most, from scenario to scenario. But I guess, part of being a mature adult is sometimes you recognizing, like, for example, the Psychology Today blog. If that was a blog just on my own website, I would have changed the phrase, women want a grown ass man, to, as I did on the blog, they want a mature man. There's little moments like that where, right, we just, we're still ourselves, but we just maybe got to speak to the audience in order to be heard, in order to be received, because they still get the message across. Like in that situation, the message of the blog is still coming across, but really it's going to be better received for that audience if I am just a tiny bit less me.
Yeah. Well, you're reading the room, like you said, and knowing your audience. So it's not that you're not you're just being very careful and intentional about how you come across, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And our last question, what's one thing you wish you would have known sooner?
One. I had to pick only one.
Oh no, you could talk all day. We'll just stay here listening to you talk about whatever you wish you would have known sooner.
Well, gosh, I mean, I think that it's really, I wrote the book that I felt that I needed a while ago, even though I did grow up in a sex positive household and was this athlete. I basically, it was almost like I relapsed for a while there in my college and 20s, where there was just the messages of what I was supposed to be as a woman really penetrated in a way that wasn't healthy, to look a certain way, being, especially as I skied Division I, and just in doing sports, these pressures to be smaller or to, look or act a certain way. I wish that I had just said, F that. And at the time, because I think it did take me out of myself. I was very much more in my head, but it's a journey, and it's part of sort of the hero's journey, is we have these times in which we get away from ourselves. And then through the practice of coming back to ourselves, we do hopefully gain some more wisdom. And so the book wouldn't have been written, I guess, if I hadn't gone through those like 5 to 10 years where I felt like I really wasn't inhabiting and loving and experiencing my body in the way that I do now. And for the record, it's not like every day I wake up and I'm like, woo, I'm loving my body. I'm a human being, where I also have my moments where I'm like, oh, my aches, my pains, or I wish it would do this, not that. But overall, I feel such a liberation and freedom from like worry about how the outer form and shape of my body or what I'm putting into it. There's just a steadiness and an inner trust. So I wish I had carried that through kind of from I'm more like 15, 16 into 26, those years.
Yeah, that inner trust, knowing that our body, our mind, it's interconnected and it's there to protect us. We just have to listen to it.
Well, I am so sad to sign off the show. I want to talk to you forever. I'm so grateful that you joined us, and your wisdom, your insight. It's just beautiful. This book, The Pleasure Is All Yours, is an incredible, incredible book. And I just want to thank you again for writing it and sharing it with the world.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm really happy that you guys took the time to read it. I mean, we're all kind of competing for what information we digest. And so thanks for taking the time to check it out.
Oh, it's so worth it. And everyone needs this book. And we can't wait to go on your retreats and to hang out with you again. We're so excited. It's going to happen.
Yes. Yes. Let's make it happen.
Yes. All right. Well, we leave our listeners with a piece of gold. Would you like to share your gold with us?
All right. I have a quote from one of my favorite poets. And despite her being one of my favorites, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but it's Naira Wahid. She's got a lot of great stuff. But the one that I love is, yes, yes, I do have the right to be this lush and never ending.
This is Gold Ivy signing off. Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.